The Galactic Council chamber buzzed with low murmurs, a symphony of dismissive tones and subtle sneers. Commander Alara Thorne stood in the center, her back straight and hands clasped tightly at her sides. Around her, the representatives of a dozen species loomed from their elevated seats, looking down as if she were a child pleading for a larger portion of dinner. Esteemed members of the Concordium, Alara began, her voice steady but charged with urgency. Earth is under siege. The Korok invasion fleet has already reduced 3 of our major cities to rubble. They've poisoned our oceans, torched our forests, and enslaved our people. We are requesting immediate military aid. A reptilian delegate, her emerald scales glinting under the chamber's pale light, clicked her teeth impatiently. Commander Thorne, Earth is a Category 3 planet with no significant strategic value. The Concordium cannot divert resources to every minor conflict. The room hummed with muted agreements. Alara clenched her fists behind her back, nails digging into her palms. Minor conflict? She repeated, her voice rising. Millions are dead, and millions more will die unless. Commander, interrupted another representative, a bulbous, slug-like creature with a deep, resonant voice. The Concordium's resources are stretched thin. If Earth cannot defend itself, it is hardly our concern. Perhaps you should negotiate terms of surrender. Alara's composure cracked, her jaw tightening. Terms of surrender? To a species that sees us as nothing more than slaves and fuel for their war machines? Earth has contributed to this council. You have contributed little, the reptilian snapped. Adaptability and endurance are admirable traits, but they are hardly assets in war or diplomacy. Humanity has always been a lesser member of this alliance. Laughter rippled through the chamber, a low, disdainful sound that pierced Alara's resolve like daggers. She scanned the faces of those gathered, pristine, unscarred, untouched by the horrors her people endured. They didn't care. They never had. A hulking, multi-limbed Korok general seated at the end of the chamber smirked. Perhaps the humans would prefer relocation. We have identified an uninhabited moon within your system. It could sustain a fraction of your population, assuming they adapt quickly enough. The words hit Alara like a blow. You suggest abandoning our home? She demanded, her voice trembling with rage. The cradle of humanity, where we have bled and thrived for millennia? You expect us to simply leave? The general shrugged, his metallic exoskeleton clicking. Survival requires sacrifice. Silence filled the chamber, thick and oppressive. Alara's heart pounded in her chest, each beat louder than the last. Her nails drew blood from her palms, the sharp sting grounding her in the moment. Survival requires sacrifice, she echoed softly, her voice barely audible. Slowly she looked up, meeting the eyes, or their equivalents, of each delegate in turn. You're right. She straightened, her shoulders pulling back as a fierce light ignited in her eyes. Humanity will survive. But let me be clear, if you will not stand with us now, you will not forget us later. The reptilian delegate leaned forward, her forked tongue flicking in mock amusement. Is that a threat, Commander Thorne? Alara's lips curled into a cold smile. It's a promise. Without another word, she turned on her heel and strode out of the chamber, her boots echoing against the polished floor. The murmurs swelled behind her, a cacophony of dismissive laughter and whispered doubts, but she didn't look back. She didn't need their pity or their help. Humanity would face the Korok alone, and they would make the galaxy remember it. The war room aboard the orbital station buzzed with activity. Tactical officers barked orders, holographic maps flickered with updates, and the distant hum of engines vibrated through the walls. Alara stood at the center, her presence commanding the attention of every soul in the room. Status report, she demanded. A young officer stepped forward, sweat glistening on his brow. The Korok fleet has deployed planetary siege weapons. Casualties are catastrophic. We've lost contact with most major cities. Alara nodded grimly. And the Phoenix Array? The officer hesitated. Operational, but untested. Its output. Doesn't matter. She cut in. We use it, or we lose everything. Another officer spoke up, his voice tinged with doubt. Commander, the array is a last resort. If it fails, we die. Elara interrupted. Her gaze swept the room, pinning each officer with the weight of her determination. We've spent decades preparing for the day when the galaxy's disdain would turn to violence. That day is here. Humanity has no choice but to fight like we've never fought before. The room fell silent, the gravity of her words sinking in. Elara stepped closer to the holographic display, her fingers brushing against the glowing image of Earth. The Concordium thinks we're weak, she said softly. The Korek think we're prey. They've forgotten what humanity is capable of when pushed to the brink. She turned back to her team, fire blazing in her eyes. Let's remind them. The first strike came at dawn. Korek ships hovered ominously in Earth's skies, their blackened hulls blotting out the sun. They expected the usual resistance, disorganized, desperate, doomed. What they got was a storm. Orbital cannons roared to life, tearing through the fleet with pinpoint accuracy. Ground forces launched counterattacks using experimental weapons crafted from salvaged alien tech. Swarms of genetically enhanced drones, piloted remotely by Earth's brightest minds, ripped through enemy lines with ruthless efficiency. In the chaos, Elara led a small strike team aboard the Korek flagship. Clad in reinforced combat armor, she moved like a force of nature, her rifle spitting fire with every calculated step. Her team followed close behind, their movements synchronized, their resolve unshakable. They reached the ship's command center, a sprawling chamber of steel and light. The Korek general turned to face them, his mandibles clicking in surprise. Commander Thorn, he growled, his voice a low rumble. You should have stayed on your doomed planet. Elara raised her rifle, the barrel trained on his chest. And missed the chance to look you in the eye when we bring you down? Not a chance. The general lunged, his massive frame hurtling toward her. Elara fired, the shot piercing his armor and sending him crashing to the floor. Before he could rise, she was on him, pressing the barrel of her rifle against his head. This is for Earth, she said coldly, pulling the trigger. The victory was hard-fought and bittersweet. Earth lay in ruins, its people battered but unbroken. As the last of the Korek ships retreated, Elara stood atop the orbital station, gazing out at her wounded planet. A transmission crackled to life behind her. Commander Thorn, a Concordium voice said hesitantly, we have reconsidered our position. The Korek threat has been neutralized, but humanity's actions have disrupted galactic order. We demand. Elara cut the transmission with a flick of her wrist. They can wait, she muttered. Humanity had snapped, and the galaxy would never forget. The command room of the underground base hummed with tense energy as humanity's remnants worked with a determination bordering on desperation. Elara Thorn moved among them, issuing orders with precision and steel in her voice. Holographic displays lit the air, showing a shattered Earth and the relentless approach of the Korek reinforcements. Every minute brought the invaders closer to total domination, but the humans weren't finished yet. Report. Elara barked as she reached the central console where Dr. Malik, Earth's foremost scientist, was feverishly working. The Phoenix array is fully armed, but the calibration isn't ideal, Malik said, not looking up from his calculations. It could destabilize before we use it to fry the Korek fleet. Elara finished, crossing her arms. That's a risk we'll take. What about Project Genesis? Malik hesitated, his fingers hovering over the keys. Commander, Genesis wasn't designed for warfare. We intended it for ecological restoration. If we repurpose it now... It's already been repurposed, Elara interrupted, leaning closer. Our survival depends on making them regret ever setting foot on Earth. Forget the original intent. Can you activate it? Yes, Malik admitted, though his face showed clear reluctance. But the energy output could... Then do it, Elara snapped, her voice cutting through the din. We don't have time for second-guessing. The Korek didn't hesitate to turn our home into a battlefield. We won't hesitate to turn the battlefield into their graveyard. A voice crackled over the comms. Commander, the advance fleet is within range of our outer defenses. Deploy the first wave, Elara ordered. Keep them distracted while we prepare the next phase. Across the underground base, a cheer rose as missile batteries roared to life. On the surface, the skies lit up with streaks of fire as humanity's automated defenses launched an unrelenting assault. Korik's ships weaved and dodged, their shields absorbing the brunt of the attack, but some faltered and fell, slamming into the earth with fiery explosions. Elara watched the battle unfold on the main screen. It wasn't enough. Not yet. Commander, said Captain Reyes, her second in command, approaching with a grim expression. The drones are ready for deployment. Teams Alpha and Beta are awaiting your signal. Send them in, Elara said without hesitation. And tell them to hit hard. No mercy. Reyes nodded and left to relay the orders. Elara turned back to Malik. How long until Genesis is ready? 20 minutes, Malik replied, sweat glistening on his brow. But we need to secure the activation site. If the Korik breach it, they won't, Elara said firmly. Not while I'm still breathing. The activation site for Project Genesis was deep in the heart of what had once been the Amazon rainforest, now a barren wasteland after the Korik terraforming efforts. Its purpose had been noble once, a revolutionary system capable of rejuvenating ecosystems, purifying air and water, and restoring life to dying planets. Now it would be humanity's deadliest weapon, turning the land itself into a weaponized force. As Elara prepared to leave, Reyes returned, his face shadowed by doubt. Commander, if we fail. We won't, Elara said, cutting him off. But if we do, then we make sure the Korik remember the cost of underestimating us. Reyes saluted, his expression hardening into resolve. Yes, ma'am. Minutes later, Elara led a strike team toward the activation site. The journey was treacherous, with Korik forces closing in on all sides. Explosions rocked the ground as the alien invaders intensified their assault, determined to snuff out humanity's last resistance. The team moved with practiced efficiency, their training and desperation giving them an edge against the larger, more advanced enemy forces. As they neared the site, a Korik ambush forced them to take cover. Energy blasts scorched the ground around them, and the air filled with the acrid smell of burning debris. Suppressing fire! Elara shouted, raising her rifle and firing at the enemy positions. Her team followed suit, laying down a barrage that forced the Korik to retreat momentarily. In the brief lull, she activated her comms. Malik, status report. We're nearly there. Malik's voice crackled through the earpiece. But we need 10 more minutes. You've got 5. Elara snapped. We'll hold the line. The Korik returned with reinforcements, their heavy weapons shredding the human cover. Elara's team fought valiantly, but the odds were stacked against them. One by one, her soldiers fell, their sacrifices buying precious seconds. When the Korik finally broke through the line, Elara stood her ground. She faced the towering alien commander leading the assault, her rifle aimed squarely at his chest. You made a mistake coming here, she said, her voice cold and steady. The Korik commander tilted his head, his mandibles clicking in amusement. You fight well for a species already defeated. Surrender, and I might spare you. Elara smirked, her finger tightening on the trigger. You talk too much. She fired, the shot piercing the commander's armor and sending him sprawling to the ground. The remaining Korik hesitated, a flicker of uncertainty crossing their brutal ranks. Before they could recover, the ground beneath them began to tremble. Elara, it's done! Malik's voice came through the comms, triumphant but strained. Genesis is online! A deep rumble spread through the earth as Project Genesis activated. The barren ground around the activation site erupted with rapid growth, vines and roots surging forth like living weapons. The Korik forces found themselves ensnared, their machines crushed, and their soldiers impaled by the unstoppable tide of nature's wrath. Elara watched the chaos unfold, a grim smile playing on her lips. For years, humanity had used its ingenuity to adapt and survive. Now, they were using it to conquer. Fall back! She ordered her team, the survivors rallying around her as the Genesis wave continued to spread, consuming everything in its path. By the time they reached the extraction point, the once bleak landscape was unrecognizable, a dense jungle teeming with lethal, unrelenting life. Back at the command center, Alara stood before the central display, watching as the Korak fleet began to withdraw. The Phoenix Array had taken its toll, decimating their ships, but it was Genesis that had turned the tide. The invaders had learned the hard way that Earth wasn't just humanity's home, it was their weapon. Reyes approached, his face a mix of exhaustion and awe. "Commander, the Korak are retreating. We did it." Alara nodded, her gaze never leaving the screen. "This is just the beginning," she said quietly. "They'll come back, and next time, they won't underestimate us." Reyes hesitated. "And the Concordium? They'll see this too," Alara said, her voice hardening. "Let them see. Let them understand what happens when you push humanity too far." She turned away from the screen, her resolve unshaken. The battle was won, but the war was far from over. Humanity had snapped, and the galaxy would never forget. The command center was a cacophony of alarms and urgent voices as reports flooded in from every front. Alara Thorne stood at the heart of it all, calm amid the chaos, her mind racing as she pieced together the rapidly shifting battlefield. The Korak fleet, battered but far from broken, had regrouped for one final push, their flagship, a colossal dreadnought bristling with weapons, leading the charge. Humanity's orbital defenses were stretched thin, their ground forces near collapse. "Commander, the Phoenix Array is offline," a technician shouted over the din, panic thick in his voice. "The system overheated during the last volley. We need at least an hour to reboot." "We don't have an hour," Alara snapped, her eyes narrowing at the tactical display. The dreadnought was moving into position, preparing to fire its planet cracker cannon. "If that weapon fires, Earth is finished." Dr. Malik's voice crackled through the comms. "Genesis is still active. We could—" "No," Alara interrupted sharply. "Genesis isn't designed to counter orbital threats. We need another option." Captain Reyes stepped forward, his face grim. "Commander, we still have the Valkyrie." Alara turned to him, her jaw tightening. The Valkyrie was humanity's last surviving capital ship, a relic of Earth's earliest ventures into deep space. It was fast, heavily armed, and utterly irreplaceable. More importantly, it carried a prototype weapon, a gravimetric destabilizer capable of collapsing even the most advanced shielding systems. It had never been tested in combat. "If we lose the Valkyrie," Alara began, but Reyes cut her off. "If we lose Earth, the Valkyrie won't matter," he said. "Let me lead the strike." Alara's eyes met his, and for a moment, the weight of the decision hung between them. Finally, she nodded. "Take a skeleton crew. Get in close and disable their shields. Once you've done that, we'll hit them with everything we've got." "Yes, ma'am," Reyes said, saluting before turning to leave. As he walked away, Alara called after him. "Reyes," she said, her voice softer now. He paused, looking back. "Make it count." He nodded once, a fierce determination in his eyes. "I will." As Reyes and his crew prepared the Valkyrie for launch, Alara turned her attention back to the tactical display. The dreadnought loomed larger with each passing moment, its cannon charging with a sickly green glow. She activated her comms, broadcasting to all remaining forces. "This is Commander Thorne," she said, her voice cutting through the static like a blade. "The Korak think they've broken us. They think we're finished. But humanity isn't done fighting, not by a long shot. Hold the line. Delay them at all costs. Buy us the time we need to strike back. And remember, this is our home. We don't back down. Not now. Not ever." Across the battlefield, weary soldiers straightened, their resolve hardening at her words. Automated turrets roared to life, and drone swarms surged forward in suicidal waves, harrying the Korak ships and forcing them to divert power to their shields. On the ground, resistance fighters launched hit-and-run attacks, their ingenuity and desperation keeping the enemy off balance. In the skies above, the Valkyrie powered up its engines and streaked toward the dreadnought, its sleek frame cutting through the void like a dagger. On board, Reyes stood on the bridge, his hands gripping the rail as his crew worked with practiced precision. "Target acquired," the weapons officer reported. "Gravimetric destabilizers primed. Approach vector locked," said the pilot. "We'll be in range in 60 seconds. Make it 30, Reyes ordered. "We don't have time to play it safe." The Valkyrie accelerated, its thrusters burning white-hot as it closed the distance. The dreadnought's guns swiveled toward it, spitting beams of searing energy. But the Valkyrie danced through the barrage, its pilot weaving a path through the storm. The bridge shook violently as a near miss sent shockwaves rippling through the ship. "We're hit!" shouted the engineer. "Shields down to 50%. "Keep going," Reyes barked. "We're almost there." The dreadnought grew larger on the view screen, its armored hull filling the frame. The gravimetric destabilizer powered up, a deep hum reverberating through the Valkyrie's hull. "Firing solution locked," the weapons officer said. 10 seconds to discharge." "Hold steady," Reyes said, his knuckles white against the rail. "Hold." A massive explosion rocked the Valkyrie as a direct hit tore through its aft section. Alarms blared, and the lights flickered, but the crew held their ground. The gravimetric destabilizer fired, a beam of shimmering energy lancing out and striking the dreadnought dead center. The ship's shields flickered, then collapsed in a cascade of sparks and light. "We did it!" the weapons officer shouted. "Their shields are down!" Reyes allowed himself a small smile, but it was fleeting. "All hands prepare for impact. Evasive maneuvers won't save us now." On the ground, Elara watched as the dreadnought's shields fell. She immediately activated her comms. "All units, focus fire on the enemy flagship. Everything we've got." The response was immediate. Orbital cannons, ground-based missile launchers, and even handheld rocket launchers turned their sights on the dreadnought, unleashing a torrent of destruction. The massive ship shuddered under the assault, its armor buckling and splitting apart. The Valkyrie, its engines failing, made one final run at the dreadnought. Reyes stood tall on the bridge, his voice steady as he gave his final order. "Ram it! Full speed!" The Valkyrie collided with the dreadnought in a cataclysmic explosion, the impact tearing through the Korak flagship and triggering a chain reaction in its reactor core. The resulting blast lit up the skies, a brilliant, fiery plume visible from the surface of the Earth. Cheers erupted across the command center as the tactical display showed the remaining Korak ships retreating, their formation broken and their will shattered. Elara allowed herself a moment of relief, but it was tempered by the knowledge of what they had lost. "Commander," a voice said behind her. She turned to see Malik, his face pale but resolute. "The Korak fleet is withdrawing, but we're detecting unusual energy readings from their last known position." Elara frowned. "What kind of readings?" Malik hesitated. "It could be a failsafe. Some kind of self-destruct mechanism. If they can't win, they might try to take us all with them." Elara's jaw tightened. "Get me all the data you can. We're not out of this yet." As she returned to the central console, the weight of command pressed heavily on her shoulders. Humanity had won a battle, but the war was far from over. They had proven their resilience, their ingenuity, and their willingness to sacrifice, but the galaxy was vast, and the threats they faced were far from over. Elara Thorne stood tall, her gaze fixed on the stars. "Let them come," she muttered to herself. "We'll be ready." The air was heavy with the scent of scorched earth as the remains of the Korak fleet disappeared into the void, retreating to the far reaches of the galaxy. The people in the command center erupted into cheers, their voices a mixture of relief and exhilaration. Yet Elara Thorne, standing at the center of the chaos, did not join them. Her focus was on the holographic display before her, tracking every ship, every movement, waiting for the faintest sign of duplicity. Malik approached cautiously, his expression pale but determined. "Commander, we've confirmed the retreat. The Korak fleet is scattering to their outer colonies. It's over." Is it? Elara asked without looking at him, her voice low and cold. They've left us bloodied, Malik. They'll come back, and when they do, it won't be for conquest, it'll be for annihilation. Malik hesitated, his hands twitching at his sides. Commander, we've driven them off. Earth is still standing. That's a victory. No, Elara said sharply, finally turning to face him. This isn't victory. It's survival. And survival without preparation is just waiting to die. She took a step closer, her eyes locking onto his. Tell me about the failsafe. Malik swallowed hard. We detected residual energy patterns consistent with self-destruct mechanisms. The data suggests they were linked to their retreat trajectory, possibly as a contingency plan to wipe us out if they couldn't win. And? Elara pressed. And, he admitted reluctantly, we're still deciphering the full scope. If triggered, it could destabilize the planet's magnetic field, or worse. Elara turned back to the display, her fists clenching at her sides. Get a team on it. Prioritize findings. If the Korok planted something, we need to know what, where, and how to stop it. Yes, Commander, Malik said, retreating toward his station. Reyes's absence weighed heavily on her as she moved through the command center, issuing orders. Every step reminded her of the sacrifices made that day, of the brave souls who had given everything so humanity could live to see another sunrise. There was no time to mourn, but the grief lingered at the edges of her resolve, threatening to crack the armor she'd built around herself. A voice broke through her thoughts. Commander Thorne, incoming transmission from the Concordium Council. Elara's jaw tightened, and a ripple of tension passed through the room. The Council, silent in Earth's hour of need, had finally decided to speak now that the Korok were gone. She straightened, her expression hardening. Put it through. The holographic display shifted, replacing the battlefield map with the faces of the Concordium delegates. Their expressions ranged from thinly veiled curiosity to outright disdain. At their center was High Arbiter Vrax, his bulbous, slug-like form quivering with exaggerated gravitas. Commander Thorne, Vrax began, his voice oozing condescension. It seems you've managed to repel the Korok, though at considerable cost. An impressive display, for your kind. Elara's gaze didn't waver. You mean for a species you deemed expendable? Vrax blinked, his gelatinous eyes narrowing slightly. It was never our intention to abandon Earth. However, the Concordium must prioritize resources for the greater good of the galaxy. The greater good? Elara echoed, her voice sharp. While you debated policy and logistics, we bled for our survival. We fought alone, without your aid or support, because you decided we weren't worth saving. And now you want to lecture me about the greater good? The chamber fell silent, the other delegates exchanging uneasy glances. Vrax shifted uncomfortably, his tone losing some of its smugness. Commander, emotions run high in the aftermath of conflict. But we must look forward. The Concordium is prepared to offer reparations to aid in Earth's recovery. Elara stepped closer to the display, her presence commanding even through the projection. We don't want your reparations. What we want is recognition. Earth isn't just another backwater colony for you to dismiss. Humanity isn't a lesser species to be ignored. We've proven that today. Vrax's expression darkened. Your defiance is noted, Commander. But let me remind you that Earth remains part of the Concordium. Your actions today, while bold, could have consequences. Disruption of galactic order is not. Don't lecture me about order. Elara cut in, her voice sharp as steel. The Concordium's order left us to die. We created our own, forged from blood, ingenuity, and unyielding will. If that's disruptive, then so be it. The room behind her erupted in murmurs of agreement. The delegates on the screen looked increasingly uncomfortable. Vrax opened his mouth to respond, but Elara raised a hand, silencing him. Here's how this is going to work, she said, her tone measured and deliberate. Earth will rebuild on our terms. We will no longer beg for scraps from your table. We will no longer tolerate being treated as second-class members of this alliance. If the Concordium wants to avoid another Korak, then you will treat humanity as equals. Partners. Or we'll walk away entirely. The room behind her fell silent. On the screen, the delegates exchanged looks of shock and disbelief. Vrax's gelatinous form quivered, his voice betraying a hint of panic. You would abandon the Concordium? Do you understand the implications of such a decision? I understand perfectly, Elara said. What I don't think you understand is this: humanity doesn't need the Concordium to survive. We've proven that. And if you force us to choose between subjugation and independence, you won't like the answer. For a long moment, no one spoke. The weight of her words hung heavy in the air, challenging and unyielding. Finally, Vrax sighed, the sound wet and unpleasant. Your terms will be considered, Commander Thorn. But know this: the galaxy does not look kindly on rebellion. Then it's a good thing we don't care what the galaxy thinks, Elara replied, ending the transmission with a decisive motion. The holographic display returned to the battlefield map, but Elara's attention was already elsewhere. The room was quiet, the weight of her confrontation with the Concordium still sinking in. Malik approached cautiously, his expression a mixture of concern and admiration. Do you think they'll accept? He asked. They don't have a choice, Elara said, her gaze fixed on the map. They've seen what we can do when we're underestimated. They won't risk pushing us any further. Malik nodded, though the doubt lingered in his eyes. And if they do? Elara turned to him, her expression fierce and unrelenting. Then we'll remind them why no species will forget the day humanity snapped. She turned back to the map, the weight of the future pressing heavily on her shoulders. The fight wasn't over, not by a long shot. But for the first time in centuries, humanity wasn't just fighting to survive. They were fighting to thrive, to claim their place among the stars. And Elara Thorn would make damn sure they succeeded.